Hey, what's going on guys? Welcome back to another video in a Node.js for Beginners series. And in this video, we will continue to build our contact manager app using Express and MongoDB. We will introduce the authentication, and for that, we will create the registration and the login endpoint. We will also see how we can hash the raw password, and we can provide the user with the JWT access token. So if this sounds interesting, then stick around. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss the videos like this one. So let's get started. Alright guys, so I'm using the same application code which we built in a previous video. So if you have missed that video, then you can click on the card above and jump to it directly. So now let's start with the authentication module, and in the authentication what we will do is we are going to provide some endpoints which will help us a user to register themselves and then log in, and once they log in they can use a access token, and then with the help of the access token they can manage their contacts. So now let's start with the routing first. So what I will do is I'm going to go to my server.js, and inside the server.js I'm going to copy this and then I'm going to add here, and this time our API URL will be the users, as we are going to register the user and then we are going to have a login user. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to the user routes. So let's have the user routes, and now let's go and create the user routes file. So I will go to my routes, and inside the routes I'm going to create a new file which will be the user routes.js. So now in the user route.js, let's first import the express. So I'm going to have the constant, I will have the express, and this will be equals to the require, and I will have the express, and then I'm going to have the router. So let's have the router, and this router will be coming from the express dot router method. So I'm going to call the router method. Now let's create the route. So what I will have is I'm going to have the router dot post, and on this post I will have the register, and when we have the register we are going to have the request response, and then we can have the response dot json, and this response can be, I will have the message, and I will have the register the user, and then we can have a login endpoint, so that will help our users to log in. So I'm going to have the login, and I will also create one more endpoint that will give the information of the current user. So let's have a slash current. All right, I'm going to change this to login user. So let me have the login user, and I will change this to current user information. So let's have the current user information, and now let's give a try. So I will go back here, and here instead of this I'm going to have the users slash register, and I'm going to send. So I see that we get an error, so it should be a post request. So now let's send it, and we still see an error. So probably let's see that our application is running or not. So I'm going to open the terminal, and here what we see is that we have an error, and the error is express.router is not a function. All right, so we made a mistake. Now let's go to the user route, and this should be capital R. Now I will save it, and we still have an error. Now let's go and fix that. In the server.js on line number 13 we have an error. So I will go to the server.js, and on line number 13 we have an error that there is no user route. So we need to export the user route. So let's go here and let's have the module.export, and I'm going to export the router. All right, so that it is now available in my server.js. Now everything works fine. Let's go and let's check. So if I go to this URL API users register, and if I make a send, then we see that we have registered the user. Similarly, let's go and check for the login, and I see that we have the login, and then let's have the current user. So if I click, then we see the current user, but since the current user should be a get request and not post, so let's go and let's make this change. So it should be a get request. All right, so now the next thing we will do is we are going to create the controller for the users. So let's go to the controller, and let's create the user controller.js. So I will go here, I will have the user controller.js, and then in the user controller.js what we can do is we can just do simply a copy paste of this, and I'm going to have it here, And the first thing we are going to have is to register a user. So let's have a register a user, and we are going to have a post method. This will be users slash register, and this will be a public access, so anyone can access the endpoint and then register the user. We will change this to register user. Oops, so this will become register user, and inside this one we can now remove this, and we can go to the user route, and we can cut this, and we can add that in the controller. So let's go here and let's add in the controller. I will save it, and now let's go and export it. So I will have the module dot export, and then we will export the registered user. So I'm going to copy and I'm going to add it here. Now we will also need to import it in the user routes, so we can import it. So let's have the register user, and you will see that it gets auto imported. So now we have to create the login user as well. So let's go to our controller back, and I'm going to copy this. I will add it here, and I will change this to login user. So this will be login user. I will have the login user. This will be a post API, and the endpoint will be the login. It will also be a public endpoint, and then we can change this. So let's go here, and I'm going to cut this, and let's add that in our controller. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to add it here, and I'm going to export the login user as well. Now the third one is the current info of the user. So what we will do is let's create one more method. All right, and this time this method will be a private method, so only a logged in user can get the current information of a user. So now this will change to the current user info. The endpoint will now change to current. It will be a private, and here I'm going to have the current user. Let's cut this. So I'm going to cut this, and I will add it here. So let me add that here, and I will save it. We are going to now export the current user. So let's add the current user, and let's import the current user here. So I'm going to import the current user, and I will also import the login user. Now let's copy the login user and provide the login user function here. And for the current user, I'm going to provide the current user here. I will save it, and we see that we get an error. So let's go and see what the error is. So in the user controller, line number 4. So let's go to the user controller, and on the line number 4, we see that I don't see any error, but what is the error? It says async handler is not defined, and we need to import the async handler. So what we will do is I'm going to have the constant async handler, and this will be equals to the require, and I will have the express async handler. All right, I will save it. So now everything should work fine. We see that now we don't see the error, and what I will do is I'm going to close this contact controller and also close the contact model, and now let's give a try. So if I run it, then we'll still see that we get the correct response, register the user. So now we have created it. Now the next thing what we have to do is we need to make the functionality for register the user, and for that first we have to create the user model. So let's go and create the user model. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to create a new file, and let's name it as the user model.js. And in the user model.js, let's import the Mongoose. This will be equals to the require, and I'm going to add the Mongoose here. Then I'm going to create a constant with user schema, and this will be equals to the mongoose.schema, and this will be an object. And what values we will need in order to register a user? The first property I need is the username. So let's have the username, and this username will be of type string. So I will have the username of type string. Then I will have the, I misspelled the type. Then I will have the required, and yes, this fill is required, so I'm going to have it as true. And I will have a message as please add the user name. The second field is we need to have an email address of the user to register the user. So for that I will have a type as string, and then I will have the required field. So let me have the required, and the required will have the flag as true, and then the message is please add the user email address. I'm also going to add one more property, which is the unique, so that I need a unique email address every time when a user is registered. So no duplicate user with the same email ID can register themselves. So I will add a property called unique. I will have the flag as true. And then whenever someone try to register themselves with the same email address, what I will have a message that email address already taken, so that we can prevent them to register twice with the same email address. And we will also need the password. So let's have the password fill. I will have the type as string. All right, then I will have the required field. So let's have the required, and it will have a flag as true. And I will have the please add the user password. All right, I will save it, and I will just change this to small l. And then we will also need the timestamp. So let's add the timestamp. So I'm going to have the timestamps, and I will have it as true. And then what we can do is now we can use the module export, and we can export the schema. So I will have the module exports, and this will be equals to the mongoose dot model, and let's name the model as user. So I will have the user, and then I can have the user schema. So now we have created the model as well. The next thing what we can do is now let's write the functionality in order to register a user. So I will go to my controller, and whenever a user wants to register themselves, they need to provide the username, email address, and the password in the request body. So what we are going to do is let's destructure those information. So what I will do, I will have a constant. I will have the username, the email address, and the password of the user, and all these three fields we will get it from the request dot body. And once we have it, we're going to make a check that if the username is not empty, or the email is not empty, or the password is not empty. So I will have it, and in that case what we will do is we are going to send a response status as 400. So the validation is failed, and we will throw an error actually. So I will have the throw new error. So we will have an error object, and then we will have all fields are mandatory. So before creating a user, what we will see is we are first going to check that whether with the particular email address, do we already have an existing user in our database or not. So what I will do is I'm going to have a constant user available, and then I can make use of an await keyword, and then we can use the user model in order to interact with our MongoDB database. So let's import the user model first. So I will have the constant user, and this will be equals to the require. Then I'm going to have the // models / user model, and we can now have the await. We can use the user model, and then we can do a find one, and this is going to help us to find a user which is already have in our database with the email address. So let's use this email address and check. So I'm going to add it here. And now if we have the email address, so we need to pass the email address in an object. So let me have an email address as an object. And now if we find this user available, so let's go here and let's have a check on that. So if we have a user, then in that case we are going to throw an error, which will again be a validation error, and we will have a status as 400, and this time the message will be that user already registered. And then what we will do is if we don't find any user, then in that case we are going to create a new user in our database. So before creating a new user, what we have to do is we are accepting the username, email address, and the password from the client. But since the password is a raw password and we cannot store the raw password into our database, so for that we need to hash our password. And in order to hash the password, we are going to make use of a library called bcrypt. So let's import the bcrypt library. So if we go to the package.json, we see that we don't have a bcrypt library. So I'm going to open a new terminal, and then I'm going to install the bcrypt. So let me have the npm install bcrypt, and I will hit enter. So now we have the bcrypt library, and now let's go and use that. So what I will do is I'm going to import the bcrypt. So let me have a constant bcrypt. This will be equals to require, and then I will have the bcrypt, and you will find this bcrypt documentation on the npm official documentation, but I will show you how we can use it. So it's very simple to use it, and what we have to do first is we need to create the hash password. So I will have the hash password, and how we are going to create is I'm going to create a constant with an hashed password, and this will be equals to, so bcrypt is also going to provide us a promise, so that's why we are going to use an async await, and I will have the bcrypt dot hash, and then in this we first need to pass the raw password. So our raw password is available in the password, and then we can provide the salt rounds. So this 10 is just the number of salt rounds that we want for the hashing of the password, so you can use this. And now if we do a console dot log, then we will be able to see the hashed password. So let me have the hashed password. All right, and then I'm going to use the hash password. I'll save it, and then what we are going to do is let's go and check first. So if I go back here and we have the post register, and in order to register a user, what I will have is I will have the user name, okay, and let's have the username as the Malvia. Then I will have the email address, and we don't need a phone, we will have a password, and I'm going to give the password as 123456. Now I'm going to click on send, so we can see the logs, and when I click on send, you will see that we have the hashed password. So this is the hash password we are going to store in the database so that we can prevent, or we can have the security of the user password. So now let's go back to the user controller, and now we already have the hashed password, and what we will do is now we can create a new user. So I want to create a new user, so let's have a constant of the user. I will have the user model, and that will give me an access to create. And whenever I want to create a user, what I will have is I'm going to have the username, I will have the email, and then I'm going to have the password. So let's have the password, and the value of the password will not be password, we are going to use the hashed password. I will save it, and then what we can see is once a user is created, so I will do a console log of the user so that we know that a user is created successfully. So I will have the user created, I'm going to have the $user, and now we need to send the information to the user. So whenever we need to send the information to the user, I don't want to send the complete user because this will also contain my hash password. So what I will do is now if we have a successful user created, then in that case I want to have the response dot status as 201, that is the resource is created, and then I'm going to pass the JSON data, and I want to pass the ID. So I will have the user dot ID, and then I will also pass the user email address. So let me have the email address, and this will be the user dot email address. And if there is a problem, then in that case what we will do is I'm going to throw an error. So I will have here, and I will have the response dot status as 400. All right, and then let's throw an error. So I will have the new error object, and I will say that user data is not valid. So that means the request was not valid. So that's why we were not able to create the new user. All right, so now we have done this. If we want to test it, what we can do is we can go to our new request, and here we can try to test it. So I can go and send a request, and you will see that when I send a request, I get a response back as status 201 created. So my resource, which is a particular user, is already created in the database, and in response to that I get the ID of my user, which is created, and then the email address. Now if I try to submit it once again, then in that case we are going to get an error, and that is because the user already registered, and we have made a check here. So if you will see that if we have a user, and if we find it one in with the help of the email address, we throw an error that the user is already registered. And now if we want to verify that in our database, then we can go to our MongoDB. So let me go to the MongoDB, and this is our collection, and inside the users, if we go, and then we will see that this is the user we just have created. So this is what we have now, the registered user. We now need to create an endpoint for the login, so that whenever a user is login, we get an access token, and for that we are going to make use of a JSON web token. So let's go back in our Visual Studio Code, and here what we will do is, before using the JSON web token, I want to go to the JSON web token website, and I want to show you something. So I will go to the JSON web token.io, and then what we will do is whenever we have a JSON web token, so this is sample JSON web token, and you will see that it contains three parts. The first part part is actually the header algorithm of the token. So it's have a algo type of HS256 and it's a type of web token. Now the next piece of information, which is in the pink color, that is actually the payload, and that payload we are going to have the user information that we are going to add in our token. So, and the third part you will see it's the signature verification. So this is how a JSON web token is, and it consists of 3 different parts. Now let's go and let's add it in our application. So what I will do is let's go and first install the JSON web token. So I'm going to have the npm install JSON web token. Now if we go to the package JSON, we should be able to see the JSON web token. All right, so now let's work on the login functionality or the login endpoint. So if we go to the user controller, and in the login endpoint, what we want is whenever a client is sending the email address and the password, in that case we need to match the password, and then we provide the user back with a access token. So what I will do is I'm going to have a constant, and then I'm going to have the JWT, and then I will have the require, and this will have the JSON web token. And then I'm going to go to my login function. So this is the login user function. And whenever a user is trying to log in, they send in the request body the email address and the password. So let's fetch the email address and the password first. So what I will do is I'm going to have a constant. I will have the email, and then I will have the password. Then this will be equals to the request dot body, and then we will just make a check that if we don't have an email or we don't have a password, I misspelled the password, then in that case we need to the response status as 400. There is a validation failure, and then let's throw an error. So I will have the new error, and then we will have all fields are mandatory. But if we have a proper email address and the password, then in that case first we need to find that whether there is a user in the database or not. So what I will do is I'm going to have a constant user, and then I will have the await. We are going to use the user model, and then we will use the find one. Then we are going to pass an email address, and this will help us to identify that user is already present in the database or not. Once we have the user, then we need to compare the password which is stored in our database and the password which we have received from the client. So what we will do is let's have the compare password with hashed password. And what we can do is it's very easy to compare. First we need a user, and along with that we will also make a check on the password. So in order to do that, we can use the bcrypt method, which is a compare. So let's use that bcrypt dot compare, and then we are comparing the password which we received from the client in the request body with the hashed password. So that will be the user dot password, and this user is the user that we have stored in our database and which we are retrieving here. We have the user, we can now compare the password with the user dot password, and if this matches, in that case what we need to do is we need to provide an access token in the response. So what we will do is we are going to have a response dot status, and the status will be 200, and then we are going to have a JSON, and in the JSON we are going to pass the access token. So let's have the access token. Now we need to know what is this access token is. Now this is where we are going to use the JSON web token. So now let's have and create this access token. So what we will do is let's create a constant with an access token, and then we can use the JWT which we have imported here, JWT, and it has a method of sign in. We need to sign a new token for our user. So what I will do is I'm going to have the JWT dot sign in, and this JWT dot sign in is going to take few parameters. So it will be an object, and we need to provide the payload. So if we go back to our browser, then you will see that we have a payload, and inside this payload we can actually pass the information which we want in our token. So let's go back, and here what I want is my payload will be the user information which I want to embed, but I don't want to embed the user password. So what I will do is I will have a user object, as my payload, and then I will embed the username. So this username will be equals to the user.username. I will also have the email address, which will be equals to the user.email. And then I'm going to have the ID, which will be equals to the user.id. So this is my payload, which I'm going to embed in my token. Now, the next thing is we have to provide an access token secret. So in order to get the access token secret, what we can do is we can just define a unique access token secret in our environment variable file. So let's go to the environment variable file. And here what I will do is I can simply have the access token. So I will have the access token secret, and then you can define a unique secret key value here. So for now, what I will do is I'm going to simply add the page123 as the secret, but you should not do it when you do a production level code. So what we'll do is I'm going to go to the user controller, and here I can use the access token secret. So in order to fetch a value from the environment variable, we can make use of a process core module, and then we are going to have an env. We will have the access token secret. So I'm going to just copy this. All right, let's add it here. Okay, so now we have that, and there is one more property which we need to pass, and that is the expiration time of our token. So we are generating a token, but we need to also provide the expiration date of that token, so that after this token is expired, users should not be able to use the token in order to call the APIs. So what we will do is we are going to set the expiry time, and let's set the expiry time as 1 minute. So this is just for the testing purpose. We are going to set the expiration time as 1 minute. And once we have this, we have the access token, and let's pass the access token as a response. And if there is a error, then we will have an else, and what we will do is we will have the response dot status of 401, and that will be that email or the password is not valid. So the thing is that if this is not true, that means we don't find a user, or we don't match the user provided password with the stored password. Then in that case, there is a problem with the credentials, and we are going to pass 401, and let's throw an error. So I'm going to throw in an error. So let's have an error object, and then I will have a message as email or password. Oops, I made a mistake. Password is not valid. All right, I will save it, and now I can just remove this. So I'm going to remove this, and I will save it. Now let's give a try. So what we will do is I will go in the new request, and here instead of the register, I will have the login, and I'm just going to remove this username. And now let's send the request. So if I click on the send, then you will see that we have the access token. So now we are able to get the access token. Now what we can do is we can use this access token and can access all our private routes. If we go to the contact controller, then you see that we have all the public routes, and now we are going to make this as a private route. So the next thing what we are going to do is we are going to make all our public routes as a private routes, and we are going to enforce a validation on those public routes. So only authenticated user can access those private routes. So what we will do is first let's start with the user controller, and in the user controller we will first go with the current user info. Now to access this endpoint, the current user info, we need an access token. I mean, the client has to pass an access token so that only authenticated user will be able to access this route. So what we will do is let's go to the user routes, and in the user routes what we have to do is, but before we do anything in the user routes, we need to make a middleware which is going to help us to validate the token which a client is sending in our request as a bearer token. So what we will do is I will go here, and I'm going to change this to current, and then what a client will do, I mean the user is going to have this token, and they are going to pass the token in the bearer section, and I will send it here. And then when a user sends the request, I have to validate this token. I have to verify that the token is a correct token and it is associated with a correct user. So for that, what we will do is we are going to create a middleware so that where we can verify the token. So I'm going to create a new file, and then I will have the validate token handler.js. And in this, what we will do is first let's import the async handler. So I will have the async handler, and this will be require. I will have the express async handler. And then the next thing is we will also need the JWT JSON web token. So let's import that, and I will have the require, and then I will have the JSON web token. I'm going to create a constant validate token function. So I will have the async handler, and inside the async handler what I will do is I'm going to have the async, and we are going to have the request response, and then we will have the next. So this is a middleware, and you will see that we have a very similar middleware as error handler also, and in the error handler also we have the request response and the next, and we also have the error. Now what I will do is I'm going to create a token variable here, and then what we will do is whenever a user is sending a request, the token is actually passed in the header section with the auth field. So either you can pass it here as a bearer token, or you can have an authorization field here. So you can also create a new value which will be an authorization. And then in the value, what you can do is you can use the bearer, and then you can add the token here. So either you do this way or we pass it here. In both the cases, we should be able to manage to have a check on our backend. So what I will do is let auth header, and this will be equals to the request dot headers dot authorization. So if we have this kind of an authorization, so I will copy and I will add it here. Or if a user is having an authorization like this, so I'm going to copy, and then if a user have an authorization like this, so in both the cases we will have the auth header. And now what we'll do is that if we have this auth header, then in that case we will also make a check that we have an auth header that starts from, so I will have the starts with, and our authorization header always starts with a bearer. So we need to have the auth in a bearer token. So what we will do is we are going to go and check for the bearer keyword. So if we have bearer, then in those cases what we need to do is let's extract the token first. So we are going to have the token variable, and we need to extract from the auth header. So what I will do is I'm going to make use of a split, and then I will split with a space bar. So if we go here, and you will see that we have a bearer and then we have a space. So let's split it with the space bar, and then we are going to use the value of the first index. So if we go here, the 0th index will contain the bearer, and the first index will contain the token. So that's where we use the first index. We have the token, and now what we need to do is we need to verify this token. So to verify, we will use the JWT dot verify, and then we need to pass the token. We also need to pass the access key. So process dot env dot access token key. So I'm going to go here, I will copy, and I will add it here. And the third parameter will be a callback function. So this will have an error, and then we will have a decoded user or decoded information. Now if we have an error, then in that case we will have a response status as 401, and we are going to throw an error. So let's throw an error. So I'm going to have a new keyword, and then we are going to throw an error as user is not authorized. So we are trying to verify the token, but user has given a token which is not a valid token, or he is using a token from some other users. So in that case, we are going to say that user is not authorized. But if a user is using a correct token, then we are going to get the user information. So what we will do is let's have a console.log, and I will log the decoded, and I will save it. Now what we can do is, in order to make use of this validate token, we can go to the user routes. So first let's export this. So I will have the module dot export, and this will be equal to the validate token. So I'm going to have the validate token here. All right, I will save it. And then what we will do is let's go to the user route, and in the user route I can make use of a validate token, because since only current user was the private route, so I will have here the validate token. It's auto imported. Now let's go and let's give a try. So I will have a API slash user slash current, and when I send a request, then we see that we have a 404, and that is because the endpoint for the user current has a get method. So let's change this to get, and I will also go here and let's send the request. And since we send the request, we see the user is not authorized. That means the token is either an expired token or the token is not a valid token. So we first need to fetch a new token. So what I will do is I'm going to create a new request. So let's go to the client. I will have a new request and I will just copy this. All right, I will add it here and I will just do a login of the user first. So let's log in the user. All right, I need to pass the body. So whenever I need to log in, I will have the email address as Dipesh. Oops, I don't remember the email address. And then I will have the password as 123456. So let's go and check the email address. So I will go here. I will have the email address. So I'm going to copy the email address and let's add the email address here. And this will be the email. This will be the password. So we have the request body now. Let's go and let's send it and we get the access token. Now let's copy the access token and now let's use the current, which is a protected route. So I'm going to go to my, I will just remove this. I will go to the auth and I will add my token here. And now I will send the request. And you see that when I send the request, what we see is this is the decoded user we have. So we have logged the decoded user, but we also see that cannot set the headers after they are sent to the client. So we are doing some mistake here. And what we will do is let's go to our validate token. So I'm going to go to my validate token here. And we have the decoded user here. So what we will do is in the decoded user, we can have the decoded dot user, which will give us the user information. So this is the user. So what I will do is I will append this on my request dot user, and then I will have this decoded dot user. So what I have done here is that I have verified the token and I have extracted the information which was embedded in the token. So the information which was embedded in the token was this one, the user information, the expiry and the creation of the token. And then I have taken the decoded dot user and this information, I have attached this information to my request dot user property. And then I'm going to have the next. So this is a middleware. So I'm just going to intercept the request. I'm going to decode the token and then I'm going to append the user information on the request body, not on the request body, but on the request dot user property. And now we will also make a check that if this we don't have a token, then in that case, that means the token is not provided or the token is or the user is not authorized. So let's have a response dot status as 401. And we will throw an error. So I will have the throw new error and the error will be that user is not authorized or token is missing in the request. I will save it. All right, now let's go and give a try. So I will go back here and then I'm going to send it. So I'm sending it and I see the token is expired. So let's go and have a new token. All right, I'm going to copy this. I'm going to add it here. So in the bearer token, let's add it. And now I'm going to send. And you see that the current user information, since we are not fetching the information from our database, but this is a protected route. So if you don't have an access token, you will not be able to access this route. So now we have successfully verified the JSON web token and we have also used it on a private route. Now what we need to do is whenever someone is requesting the current user information, we need to go to the database in the MongoDB and then we need to fetch the information and then provide it as a response. So let's go to our user controller back. And here what we will do is I'm going to go and I will remove this. And here I'm going to have the request dot user and that will give me the user information, because if we go to the validate token, then we extract the user information and we put it as request dot user. So when we have the request, in that case, we will just send the request dot user. So let's go and let's do. So I'm going to send the request, and since the token expired, let's have a new token. I'm going to copy this. Let's use the token in the auth and I'm going to send it. And you see that this is the information of my current user. The username is the Malvia, email address, and then I have the ID. All right. So the next thing what we need to do is we need to protect all our contacts route. So only a logged in user will be able to create, delete, update, and read the contacts which they have created for themselves. So what we will do is first we need to associate, whenever you create a new contact, we need to associate that contact with the user ID who is creating it. So let's go in the contact model, and in the contact model we need to update this model. So what I will do is I'm going to add a new property, and this new property will be the user ID, and this ID will be for the user who is creating the contact contact. And what we will do is we are going to have a type of this, and the type of this ID will be the mongoose dot schema dot types dot object ID, because this ID is actually created in the MongoDB, and that's where we have the object ID. And then we are going to use is as required. So whenever you create a new contact, we need to always have an user ID. So that's how it will be associated with the particular user. So I'm going to have it as true, and I need to provide the reference of the model. So the model is user. So we have made this first change, and now what we have to do is the next thing, we need to go to our contact controller and we need to make all the routes as private. So I will go to the contact controller and let's change this to private. I'm going to copy, I'm going to add it here, I will also add it here, then I will also add it here, and then I will also add it here. All right, we have it. And now let's use the validate token as a middleware for all the routes which we have. So if we go to the contact routes, then in the contact routes, what we will do is we are going to make use of a validate token. So this validate token will be used for all the routes. So we are not going to use here validate token for each of the method, but what we will do is we will have the router dot use. So we are going to use a validate token on all the routes, and this get auto imported. So this is also one of the way you can do it if you have all the routes as protected route and you need to validate the token on all the routes, or if you have only some of the routes, then in that case you can make use like this. All right, so now let's go to the contact controller, and in the contact controller now let's make use of the user ID, and then we do the CRUD operations. So the first we will start with that I need to find my contacts. So I need to find all the contacts with the user who is logged in. So we need to fetch all the contacts of a logged in user. So for that, what we will have is we are going to have the user ID, and this will be equals to the request dot user dot ID, and I will save it. And this user ID is the one we have just added in our contact model. So this is the user ID. So now if we go and try, but before trying it, what I want to do is I don't want my token to get expire every time. So I will increase the expiration time of my token. So I will go to the user controller, and in the user controller we are set as 1 minute. So let's make it as 15 minutes. And now I will go here and I will first log in with the token. So I'm going to log in. All right, then I'm going to have my token, and then what I will do is I'm going to have my contact, and then I'm going to pass this token, and now I'm going to fetch all the contacts which are created by the username Dipesh Malvia. So I'm going to send it, and we see that we get an empty arrays because right now there is no contact being created for this user which is Dipesh. Now the user which is Dipesh is going to create some contacts. So if we want to create the contacts, we are going to have a post request, and in the post request what we will do is let's have a name, and my contact is John. So let me create a contact which is a John Day, and the email address of John Day is just john@gmail.com, and then we have a phone. So let me have a phone, and I will have 1 2 3, oops, I will have 098 something something something. So this is the contact which the page wants to create it. So we also have a valid token, and now if we send it, we should be able to create it. So let's go to our controller first, and not in the user controller, we need to go to our let's close the package.json, let's close the environment variable file, let's close the contact model, and we now only interested in the contact controller. Now in the contact controller, whenever we want to create a new contact, what we need is we need to have the name, email, and phone number, but along with that we will also need to associate the user ID who is creating this. So what I will do is I'm going to have the user ID, and this user ID will be equals to the request.user.id. Since we are using this as a middleware, whenever we have a request, this middleware is going to decode the token, and then it's going to add the request.user property, and in the request.user property we will find the ID, and then we can now create this contact. All right, let's go and let's give a try. I will save it, and now I will go and create it. So if I send the request, now you will see that this is the user ID of the page, and the page now have created a contact for with the name as John Day. And now what we can do is we can create multiple contacts for the page. So the next contact I'm going to create is Nikesh G, and then the email address is Nix, and I'm going to change this phone number, and then I'm going to send, and you see that we have created a contact. Now if I want to see all the contacts which the page has created, then I'm going to send request, and you will see that we have 2 contacts which is created by the page. Now what I will do is I'm going to create a new user, and then I'm going to see that the new user is able to get all these contacts or not. So let's go back here and let's register a new user. So I will have a new user. So I will do the register, and I'm going to pass the user name, and the username this time will be let's have a user as Mark. So Mark is another user, so we will have the email address as mark@gmail.com, and then I'm going to send it, and we see that now a new user is created which is Mark. Now let's log in with Mark. So I'm going to log in with Mark, so I will change the URL as login, and I'm going to just remove this. All right, I will send the request, and we get an access token. So I'm going to copy the access token, and now what I'm trying to do is, so now this access token is for the user the page, and if he send the request, he has created 2 contacts. But now I want to change this for token for a Mark, and now this token belongs to Mark, and if I send a request, then you will see that we don't have any contacts because Mark doesn't created any new contacts for himself. So this is how we are preventing cross user trying to access the contacts for other users, and that's where the authentication is done. The next thing we need to do is we need to update and delete the contact for a user. So let's go to the contact controller back, and here what we will do is whenever we need to get a contact, we can get the contact with the help of a request.param.id. But if we want to update the contact, what we will do is first we are going to fetch the contact from our database with the help of the ID, and then this contact will contain the user ID of a user who has created. So what we will do is before updating the contact, we will make a check, and the check will be that if the contact which we have just fetched has .user id to string, and if this not equals to the request user id, then in that case we will know that a different user is trying to update a contact of another user. So what we will do is we are going to throw an error. So I will have the response status, and the status will be 403 because a user is not authorized to update a contact of another user. And then I will throw an error. So I will have the new error, and then I will have the error as user don't have permission to update other user contacts. So we have handled that case, and if it matches, so the contact.user id matches with the request.user id, then in that case we are going to simply update the contact. And we need to do a very similar thing for the delete also. So I'm going to copy this. In the delete also, we first fetch the contact from the database. We have the contact, we check that if the contact is found, then in that case we remove it. But before removing it, we need to check that the contact which we found has a user ID, and that user ID should match with the request.user.id. And then we will have, oops, we made a mistake. So user don't, and this will also user don't. So now we have protected all our CRUD operations of the contacts with the JSON Web Token. And now if we go and simply do a testing of it, then we see that this token is for the mark. And if we, let's go and let's get the token for the page again. So what I will do is I'm going to have page, and I will send a request. Oops, the email ID and the password is wrong. So probably the email ID will be the page.malvia. All right, now we have the token. Now using this token, I want to see that what all contacts this particular user has. So this user has 2 contacts. Now a user want to update this contact. So I'm going to copy this. Let's have a contact here. If I go to the body, then I will have an updated contact as Nikesh Gadekar, and I will make it updated. I will send it, and you will see that we have a contact, but we made a mistake because it's a get and we need to make a put in order to update it. And now I will send it, and as soon as I send it, you will see that the contact is updated, Nikesh Gadekar update. Now what I will do is I'm going to remove this, then I'm going to make a get, and we get the contacts back with an updated contact. Now I want to delete this contact, so I'm going to copy this, and let's have here, and I'm going to delete. So let me have this, and I'm going to send the request, and you will see that it's 200, and hopefully this contact is deleted now. So if I go and try to do a get on it, then I should not be able to find the contact. So we see that the contact not found. Now what we will do is let's go and let's fetch all the contacts back. So we don't have any contact, so there is a problem. So what we have done is, if we go here and if we see, then what we are doing is we are doing the contact dot remove, and that is removing all the contacts from our database, but we only want to remove the contact for which the user is passing the ID. So what we will do is we will have to make a change here, and we are going to have a delete one, and which ID we need to delete is we're going to have the underscore, and then we are going to have the request dot param.id. Now let's give a try. So what I will do is, first I'm going to create some contacts. So I will go here and I will send a post. All right, a contact is created. Let's create another contact. So I will have the next contact as John Day, and then I'm going to have this as John, and then I will send it. So now if I go and fetch, then we see that we have two contacts, and now I want to delete this Nikesh Gadegar updated. So I'm going to copy this, I'm going to add it here, and then I'm going to go and do delete, and I will send it. So we see that, okay, it's 200 and the contact is deleted. So if we go and do a get, we should have contact not found. But if we want to fetch all the contacts, we still should have the John Day. So you see that we have the John Day. So now we have fixed the problem with the contact dot remove. So we should use the contact dot delete one. So we have created all the CRUD API of the contacts. So we can now make use of the contacts API, and then we can manage the contact based on the user. So we also have a register user, login user, and then once a user is logged in, he can create, update, delete, and read all the contacts which he has created. And similarly, we can now have multiple users and they can manage their own contacts. So that's all I have in this video. I hope you liked the video. A thumbs up is appreciated. You can also connect with me via Facebook or Instagram. You can follow me on Twitter for latest updates. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe the channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss the videos like this one. Thank you. Thanks for watching.